We shall now move on to chapter 2, and in this chapter we shall be looking at the bill making process in Parliament. At the end of this chapter we shall understand how bills are originated, the steps involved in the legislative process, and we shall know the players that are involved in the legislative process. The actual process of enacting legislation begins with an idea, and this idea can come from a senator, a committee, the executive, an individual person, or even a professional organization. This idea is then crafted into the form of a legislative proposal, which is then submitted to Parliament for further processing. The legislative proposal is then submitted to the Speaker, who then forwards it to the clerk, who is then required to go through it and submit his comments as to whether it conforms to the Constitution, whether it is proper in terms of form and style, whether it is aligned with existing legislation, and whether or not it is a money bill. The proposal is then drafted into a bill, which is subsequently submitted to the committee for further consideration. Where the sponsor of a bill is a senator, the bill is submitted to the relevant committee for purposes of pre-publication scrutiny, and the committee is at this point required to scrutinize the bill to ensure that the bill is proper in terms of conforming to the Constitution, and it may give its comments in relation to that bill. The committee may at this point invite the sponsor of the bill, the relevant cabinet secretary, or such other stakeholders which it feels would be important in terms of value addition to the bill. The committee will then submit its comments to the Speaker on whether the bill ought to be published or not, and any other comments it may have with respect to the bill. It is important to note that the sponsor of the bill is not obliged to take on board the comments that have been submitted by the committee at this point. Where a legislative proposal originates from a committee, that committee would be required to go through the legislative proposal and adopt it for purposes of publication. Once the Speaker gives his approval for the publication of a bill, the bill is then submitted to the government printer for purposes of publication. Once a bill is published, the Speaker is required to obtain the concurrence of the Speaker of the other House as to whether a bill is a bill that concerns counties, and if it is a bill that concerns counties, as to whether it is a special or an ordinary bill. This will determine whether or not the bill will be considered by both Houses of Parliament. It is important to note that a bill must have a sponsor in order for it to be published. A sponsor is a person in whose name the bill is published, and the person responsible for steering the bill through the various legislative processes in Parliament. Once a bill is published, the Speaker of the respective House is required to obtain the concurrence of the Speaker of the other House as to whether the bill is a bill that concerns counties, and if it is, whether or not it is a special or ordinary bill. This will determine the steps in which the bill will go through subsequently. The Speaker of the other House is required to submit his response to the concurrence within a period of 7 days. Once the Speaker of the other House has given his or her concurrence and the bill is a bill that concerns counties, the bill is then introduced into the respective House of Parliament and read a first time. The bill is read a first time by reading the title of the bill, after which it is committed to the relevant committee for subsequent processing and consideration. For example, if it is a bill that deals with the production of food crops, that bill will be committed to the relevant committee dealing with matters relating to agriculture. The relevant committee has a period of 30 days, within which period it will be required to consider the bill, to carry out public participation, to consider the submissions made by members of the public, to prepare and table the report on its findings with respect to that particular bill. During the process of public participation, the committee is required to send out an invitation to members of the public to submit their comments with respect to that particular bill. This is often done by way of notice in the newspapers, and the committee may choose any other form in which to send out the invitation to members of the public for submission of their comments. The committee may also choose to invite specific stakeholders who are involved in the implementation of the bill or who would be directly affected by the implementation of the bill to give their views with respect to the various clauses contained in the bill. After this, the committee considers each and every submission made by the various stakeholders, and it would consider whether or not to adopt the various proposals submitted at this point. After the committee has prepared its report, it lays the report before the House and the bill goes through the process of second reading. At this point, the sponsor of the bill is required to move the bill and is required to take the House through the bill and give a justification as to why the House should adopt the bill. This stage is important, especially for stakeholders or persons who would have an interest in that particular bill, because it is at this point that a person would be able to gauge the kind of issues the members of parliament would have with respect to that particular bill or the various amendments that would be proposed at that particular point. Once the bill goes through the second reading, the next step is a committee of the whole. At this point, the bill is considered clause by clause, and any proposed amendments to the bill are considered at this particular point. The House will then consider any amendments that the committee may have based on the submissions that were made by members of the public at the point of public participation, and any other amendments that any other member of parliament may have with respect to that particular bill. This may either be adopted or rejected by the House. Once the committee of the whole is finalized, the bill then goes through a third reading, and at this point, no amendments may be introduced. Once the House adopts the bill, the next step would depend on whether or not the bill is a bill that concerns counties, and will also depend on where the bill originated from. If it is a bill that originated in the National Assembly and it is a bill that does not concern counties, then the bill is submitted to the President for purposes of assent. However, if it is a bill that concerns counties, the bill is then submitted to the other House, which then takes the bill through the same steps as those that were undertaken in the House that originated the bill. This therefore means that the bill will go through first reading, second reading, public participation, committee of the whole, third reading, and then subsequent submission for purposes of assent. Where the second House makes amendments to the bill, these amendments are submitted to the House that originated the bill. These amendments are then circulated to the members within a period of 7 days from the date of receipt, and the House will subsequently consider the amendments and either agree with the amendments or reject the amendments. If the House agrees with the amendments, then the bill is now prepared in the form of a vellum, and these amendments are incorporated in the bill and the document prepared for purposes of assent. However, if the originating House does not agree with any amendment that was made by the second House, the bill will then be subjected to a mediation process. In this case, a committee consisting of an equal number of members from both Houses of Parliament are then constituted into a mediation committee. The mediation committee has 30 days to consider the bill and the amendments that were made, come up with an agreed version of the amendments, and table its report in both Houses. Where the mediation committee fails to come up with an agreed version within the 30-day period, or where once it prepares its report, one House of Parliament rejects the report, then the bill fails. However, if the mediation committee is able to come up with an agreed version of the bill and table its report in both Houses, and both Houses agree to the recommendations made by the mediation committee, then the bill shall be deemed to have been passed by both Houses. The originating House then prepares the vellum of the bill by incorporating all the amendments that have been made with respect to that particular bill, and the vellum is then submitted to the President for purposes of assent. Once the bill has been submitted to the President for assent, the President has 14 days within which to either assent to the bill or submit the bill back to Parliament together with any reservations that the President may have with respect to any clauses within the bill. The Parliament will then consider the reservations that the President may have with respect to the bill and may either reject the reservations and return the bill back to the President for assent, or adopt the reservations that have been made by the President either wholly or with modification, and submit the bill back to the President. Once this is done, Article 115 of the Constitution requires the President to assent to the bill that has been resubmitted to him or her by Parliament. Where the President fails to assent to the bill within 7 days, the bill is considered to have been automatically assented to. Once the President has assented to a bill, then the bill is thereafter submitted to government printer for purposes of publication. And publication is required to be undertaken within a period of 7 days from the date of assent. Once a bill has been published, it comes into force on the 14th day from the date of its publication, unless the bill stipulates a different date for its commencement. It is important to note that Article 116 of the Constitution provides that where a bill confers a direct pecuniary interest on members of Parliament, that bill does not come into force during the duration of that particular House of Parliament, but when the next House of Parliament is elected. From this, we have been able to learn that a bill that concerns counties can originate from either House of Parliament and would be required to be considered by both the National Assembly and the Senate. We have seen that a bill goes through the first reading, second reading, committee of the whole, third reading, and we have also been able to see the process of assent. We have also been able to see that where there is disagreement between the contents of a bill, the bill may subsequently be referred to mediation for purposes of coming up with an agreed version and passage by both houses prior to assent.